Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Curtis, and I am the liaison with Food Export based in Chicago. Thank you for joining this preview of the Focus Trade Mission to South Africa in Kenya. I am joined on this call with Faith and Richard, our in-market representatives from Africa, as well as our activity coordinator for the event is Carol Bruner. This preview session is dedicated to the Focus Trade Mission to South Africa and Kenya to discuss the markets, products of interest, and general itinerary of the mission. We will also discuss the cost to participate as well as registration. The call will last about 30 minutes and will be recorded and posted to the event webpage. Everyone is automatically muted. We encourage you to ask questions through the QA box to be discussed following the presentation. Questions that are not answered will be answered in email. Later, you'll see a slide of our liaison team to connect with questions or help for this event. For those of you unfamiliar with Food Export, we are a nonprofit organization working with agricultural promotion agencies from the Midwest and Northeast. We have a total of 23 states in our program. We provide supports that U.S. companies need to enter international markets. Next slide, please. We have in-market representatives around the world to assist U.S. exporters with their international marketing efforts. You're able to sign up for virtual consultation and market builder to help grow your business in any of the countries listed. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Faith and Richard, who you will meet in person if you decide to participate in the Focus Trade Mission to Africa.
Great, and thank you so much, Cindy. And we're looking forward to having a really good time in the next hour. So the first thing is, in an age of disruption, what should you do? The thing is, look and act. Interestingly enough, we've seen a lot happening in the last couple of weeks, and you can see, oh, well, and you might be a bit apprehensive, what do we do? But if you're the one doing something, 90% of the companies out there will be just sitting back and waiting for something to happen. And so think about what's going on in the world, see where you can fit in, find those hidden gems, and you'll prosper. And so look at ages of disruption. If you're a small or medium-sized company, look at a time of disruption as an opportunity time, because sometimes your competition might not be moving as fast as you can think and move as well. So I just like to put that out there. And as we have had a lot of news around the world going on about these, the potential for trade wars and things. But interestingly enough, Africa is going to be one of the places that is not going to be hit so hard, because it's not going to be a target for anybody actually in any trade war particularly. So we're going to see maybe some diplomatic moves happening and that sort of thing. But because of the dynamics of the African market, in the medium and the short, the medium, and the long term, it is a good market. So I just want to point out that we do have staff covering the whole of the African continent, and we're ready to support you in your work endeavors across the market. I'd like Faith Okaalet, who's based out of Nairobi, Kenya, to say hello.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. My name is Faith Okaalet, and we're excited to have this first mission to Africa. Yeah, thanks, Richard.
So generally, Faith is our African agricultural program manager. She actually manages a lot of activities for agribusiness people across the continent, and we're in good hands when we're talking to Faith. So I'm generally usually based in South Africa myself, but today I'm calling you from Rwanda. And on this trip, I'm going Rwanda, Namibia, Malawi, and Gambia, some of the second-tier countries where American exporters can maybe meet one or two interesting buyers, but that's all it takes to sometimes change a business. And so when we look at Africa, we're looking at a range of different countries, 54 different countries, and there are opportunities for American exporters in almost all of them in one way or another. Next slide. So very quickly, we do have good growth across Africa. We're projecting somewhere around just over 4% for 2025, and we see that we have had good average growth of around 4%. The different regions have different rates of growth, but East Africa is growing very quickly. Southern Africa, because it's one of the more developed markets, has been growing at just less than 2%. So we do have a very good growth pattern. East Africa is definitely the world's fastest growing market. In Rwanda today, where I'm sitting, the growth is about 8.5% per year. So that makes a lot of difference to companies and people when they're looking at new markets, and as the middle class grows as well. Next, please. Very quickly, African continental free trade area. Africa's forming into a group that is something like the European Union, going to take decades to get there. I think that they're going to sort of stop at an economic union rather than a political union like Europe went. But right now, there's a lot of different trading blocks that are forming into one big block under the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is important for American exporters to understand, as the protocols for entering new markets across Africa are coming together. That includes phytosanitary protocols for food quality, protocols for living. We're going to see a lot of these things as the years go by form into single elements like you see in the European Union. Next. And very quickly, we've got a population that is very young. The average age in Africa is 19.5. In Kenya, it's actually lower than that. I believe it's 18 or somewhere between 17 and 18. In South Africa, the average age is 26. So consider that a lot of European countries where you're maybe already exporting have an average age in the late 40s. Africa is the youngster on the block. And right now there's over 1.5 billion Africans, and that means a lot of mouths to feed. But what is more important, next slide, is that there are a lot of this is also an interesting slide because this shows you where the fast population growth is happening in the world. Where it's green, there's almost a shrinkage, and where it's yellow, it's staying the same, but where it's red, it's growing very quickly. And you can see that this population growth is centralized around Africa. Next. So just very quickly, South Africa has a very sophisticated market. There's about 80% of the processed food market is controlled by 12 companies. And there's a big range of companies that do importation of food and feed elements. The agricultural side of things, if you're looking at the feed side, we're also involved in relatively heavily with a lot of states that we do work with. And we've got a lot of good demand. South Africa has been the keystone market for processed foods for many, many years. And so this is really one reason why we've paired South Africa with Kenya. And we believe that the South African economy, it's important not only for the sake of South Africa, but because South Africa exports a lot of processed foods across the rest of Africa, and the rest of Africa is growing very quickly, not only demographically, but in per capita income, meaning that people can afford more and more luxury and formal grocery stores and doing the kinds of rounds of shopping that people in America might expect. Next. And we're just looking at some of the different processed and agri-based imports from the United States that we've seen in recent years. I've only got another 2.5 minutes, so I'm going to let you have a look at this slide. Maybe we'll have our friends there at Food Export make it available for you afterward. But it's important to note that even during downturns, the U.S. has done relatively well in exporting food ingredients and feed ingredients into the markets. And particularly when we look at a large agricultural net exporter like South Africa, there's a lot of, when you look at the feed ingredients, for example, it really focuses into proteins and rendered meats and all kinds of things that go into creating a healthier feed stock. And for food ingredients, it's right across the board. There's the U.S. already does have a very good market share inside South Africa. Next. So just another uh, data sheet that I'm not going to read out to you, but just to give you an understanding that we do have a very good grasp on the ingredients market in our country, and we're looking forward to you examining this. We have compiled a lot of good information that we can put into your briefs as you come into the markets, and so we'll be including this. This is just a quick uh, touchdown on some of the data. Next. And so for Kenya, Kenya is one of the fastest growing markets in the world. Growth is somewhere between 6%. So that means that effectively its economy doubles every decade. And it's really the keystone market for distribution into the East African community. And so where Faith is sitting there in Nairobi, we see a lot of potential for distribution right across the East African community. And that means a market of over 400 million people. So when we look at Kenya, when we look at South Africa, we have to understand that these are regional distribution nodes and they're very key to getting into these places. Now, Kenya is actually just come into becoming a middle class country. So its income level has increased very radically over the last 20 years, and this is exciting. Kenya has very close and growing closer relationships with the United States. And so this is also another factor in choosing Kenya for its participation with the mission. Next, please. Again, just some more data, and we can see that the U.S. share is relatively low right now, but we're looking at growing that. It's not because the U.S. has low potential. It's simply because Kenya is a traditional trading market with Britain, with India, and with a lot of other countries. And we're seeking to change that because we know that American ingredient manufacturers can get into this market and pioneer new ways. Next. So just another data sheet, and I'm just about over time, but we can go to the next slide. So just very quickly, some of the best prospects, I'll just throw them back to you, but a lot of whey protein, where in fact, flavorants, colorants, sweeteners, oils and fats, you can see spices and flavorings, not so much spices. A lot of the spices are coming from abroad and people do their own mixing in South Africa, but flavorants for sure. That's a big part of the market that we're looking at. And next. And so for Kenya, we see something of a similar thing, a new addition to the market. There are sugar substitutes and a lot of the same things that you would see in South Africa. Kenya is maybe just a few years behind in its food processing industry, a lot of new companies coming into the market. So that leads to a lot of new opportunities for American companies. Next. So again, really focusing in on the protein with animal feed. Next. So just some quick constraints. Yes, there are regulatory hurdles, just like getting into any other market. You've got to understand what you're getting into when you come into South Africa and Kenya. These countries are no different, but we're there to help you with that and to help you understand those things. There really are good markets. You're going to find interested companies that want to talk to you. That's really the key thing. So there are constraints, but in the end, we're there to help you through the logistics, some of the logistics issues. We're there to help you with getting over some of these hurdles. And I would say that I mentioned the regulatory one because that really is the one that you do need to look at. And don't think because it's an emerging market that their regulatory environment is easier. It can be more difficult often in emerging markets, depending on how they enforce it. So It's important to understand that, and just understanding too that with South Africa and Kenya, there are sophisticated logistics networks. We've got good cold chain networks. There's a really good network, but other parts of Africa are not like that. And so tying in with a good distributor who understands the region well can help you get into all those nooks and crannies in the market. Next. So thank you so much. We're looking forward to having you join. And here's the proposed itinerary that we'll be working with. We're looking forward to seeing you. Um, I do have to say that winter in South Africa, remember we're in the southern hemisphere, is very mild. So the days will be warm, the nights will be cool. And in Kenya, it's going to be pretty much warm all year round. But we're looking forward to those of you who want to join us, and I believe we'll have time later to answer any questions you might have. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard and Faith. The services that would be provided for this focused trade mission to Africa will be a retail store tour. You'd be included in the trade mission brochure, on continuing on-site assistance by food exports and market reps during the mission. This event, as well as all focused trade missions, are branded eligible for travel for 2 travelers. You would be set up with one-on-one meetings with qualified buyers, and you would have a call with the end market reps ahead for pre-event custom product research, including market overview and important and distribution analysis. And of course, there would be a briefing by the USDA Foreign Ag Service. Next slide. If you have additional questions, please contact your liaison based on where your company is headquartered, and they can help you with additional questions. Next slide. To register for this event, we have an early bird registration, as we do with all focused trade missions, until April 4th. It is $425, and after that, it will be $625. Next slide. Again, the activity coordinator for this event is Carol Bruner. If you have any questions, please feel free to direct her directly or contact her directly or reach out to your liaison. And at that time, we'd like to answer any questions you might have about this event. One question is, how do you qualify leads when setting up meetings for the trade mission to ensure buyers are well-qualified qualified importers of products?
Great. Faith, I'd like you to answer that because I'm the one who did all the talking in the presentation and like them to hear your voice and just to get your expert opinion on that.
Thanks, Richard. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what we usually do prior to the suppliers coming in country for trade missions that we've done in the past is actually send a what we call a leads list, and part of that leads list includes potential importers who we would then include sort of a profile with history about the company, also where they have been importing from, what they are currently company profile, and so we include that in the leads list, and then we would request the suppliers to rate the profiles that we give them. And so that also helps us sort of do like a pre-qualification. And based on the ratings, we have a basic sort of scorecard that we use, which is usually A to C. And A being this company looks like a good fit. B is like, potential, and C is not interested at all. And so then that helps us sort of sift through even before suppliers come into the country. But a lot of the ones that we do present to suppliers are companies that we have, especially in this industry, worked with before, and so we do know that they are capable. Sometimes we do get some new entrants with interest, and then we also do our own sort of vetting of the company before we present them to the suppliers.
Great, thank you. We have one more. Are there any visa or vaccine requirements for South Africa and Kenya?
Nothing. bring your US passport and make sure you have two empty pages for South Africa and Kenya. Um, for South Africa, there is presently no e-visa requirement. I think that has Kenya waived that e-visa requirement, Faith? It's something that you can fill out and get back almost immediately online.
Yes. So for Kenya,
That's right.
there is an e-visa requirement which you can do, a couple of weeks to your travel. It's about $50 for the e-visa that you can do prior to coming into the country. And so we
Mhm.
would also send the requirements and the process and the link to the site where you would need to apply for the e-visa.
Right. And for Kenya, is there a requirement for a yellow vaccination card?
There is no requirement if you're coming directly from the US, but if you're passing through any other African country, then you are required to come with the yellow, what we call yellow fever card. But if you're coming
Right.
from directly from the US, there's no requirement. We do, if you have one, you can bring it if you don't, and you don't need to.
If we're coming from South Africa, I we haven't been requested, but what about South Africa? Because it's not a yellow fever area.
No, if you're coming from South Africa, then you're fine. It's usually if you're maybe from other East African countries.
Right. So
But
there
we
aren't
will
any,
check that out.
you know, there aren't any general requirements for um, prescription drugs or vaccines or anything. South Africa has almost, except for a very small little area close to the Mozambique border, there's no malaria there. And I believe that the also in Kenya, Nairobi is a very high altitude city, and so there isn't a lot of malaria there. Is that correct, Faith?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Right. So your doctor may ask you to take a malarial prophylactic for Kenya, but for South Africa, it would not be necessary at all. If you're planning on traveling onward into other African countries, then maybe you might want to consider taking a malarial prophylactic, and that would be important for you. But Americans are very welcome in South Africa and Kenya without a visa, so you don't have to send the visa in advance to the embassies in Washington. You can arrive at the airport with your passport and simply arrive and get your passport stamped and come in for 90 days. In South Africa is typical. For Kenya, I believe it's the same, but for Kenya, you do have to fill out your e-visa online, and typically you'll get it in the within. Sometimes you can get it within an hour. Sometimes you'll get it within the next day after you've filled it out and paid your $50 online.
Okay, great. We still have a few more questions about how many buyers will there be per supplier?
Uh, Faith, go ahead. You can start and I'll complete the question.
We are looking at, and please let me know if you can hear me clearly. We're looking at 5 to 6 buyers for each company in each country. The reason that we do this, if you have experienced or been to one of these developing markets, what we usually do is have the meetings at the buyers' locations. A lot of the time, South Africa is different where that is not always the case, but in Kenya, when we've had trade missions, we go to the buyer's location. And so because of that, having to go to meet a buyer at their premises, which we also believe is good exposure, especially if it is your first time in the market. So because of that and traffic, so we cap it at 6. Um, Sometimes we can get to 7 or 8, depending on buyers' availability, if some of them are flexible to come to the hotel. But because of the structure is a bit different from usual via trade missions of having to go to the premises, then that's why we would do 5 to 6.
That's right. And South Africa, I would say it would be about the same, 5 to 6 for each country. But for South Africa, we do have other key cities such as Cape Town or Durban, and it might be important for you to have a virtual meeting where you cannot fly, and they're not interested in coming to Johannesburg, but we really want you to go and visit each of these counterpart companies' premises because you get a good visualization of how they're storing things, who their management are. You'll get a better idea of all of the different management techniques and thoughts. And the other good thing is that you'll often meet more of the management team than you would if you had a hotel meeting. And so bringing that management quorum together, you have a much better potential for making sales.
Great.
Yeah.
Another question
Sorry.
is, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that also it depends on the product that you have. We'll definitely make sure that you have a full agenda, but the actual number of meetings might vary from supplier to supplier just because of the product that each of you might have.
Okay. The next
That's
question,
right.
what is the current status for Kenya importers to import GM feed ingredients, genetically modified?
Yeah, so currently the government does not allow GM products. The current president was looking to change that, and so there's discussions about it. But from where we stand as of today, that hasn't the ban hasn't been reversed. So GM products are not allowed to be imported. If that changes based on what he said at the end of last year, then we will definitely update Food Export, who will be able to share the information with you. But as of now, GM products are not allowed.
Okay, great. And then what are common payment terms, or how will I get paid?
Maybe I can start with that one. The best one for small initial transactions with a new company is cash in advance. And often when we're dealing with ingredients, we're dealing with relatively small consignments, maybe a pallet or so. And so we're looking at something that, may not be of extremely high value. But I think that it's also important to look at getting larger consignments guaranteed through some of the U.S. government programs. And I know that Food Export is helpful in helping you to understand some of those financial techniques that you can use to get your payments guaranteed. There are special applications often for Africa if you're looking at the Exim Bank, and there are special funds set aside that aren't fully subscribed. And so the Exim Bank in the US is interested in helping out with getting American companies to sell into Africa, and they've set aside funds for that. So these are different financial avenues that help you or often help the African buyer as well to get to get a financing loan, and then on your side to get a guarantee. And it's important to understand these things. So often we do ask American companies to look at that. I would not suggest putting people on 60-day payment terms initially until you've fully vetted that company. And one other important thing is people will often ask you for exclusivity in a contract. It's often best not to give that to them, but give them a de facto exclusivity, maybe just work with them, but have their contract be open, because you want to make sure that they're reaching goals and that they're getting sales for your company and they're paying attention to you. You don't want to be in a situation where they've contracted you exclusively simply to keep you out of the market. And we've heard of that before. So we really want you to be looked after from the front end of the transaction to the back end of the transaction.
Okay, we have one more. It's actually two questions. But what about ETO sterilization regulations as it pertains to spices and powdered botanicals, as well as are there any trade agreements with Africa such as NAFTA?
Yeah, so with with South African exports into the US, for example, there is a requirement for additional phytosanitary things. And some companies that are exporting to the European Union or the United States do have to meet um, basic requirements for exporting into those markets, which are relatively higher than if you were to sell into your neighboring market. Now, what this means is that although the legislation may say one thing, the companies that are working in those sectors actually have a higher discretionary requirement that they're meant to fulfill from their clients, which is interesting. So it's often not regulatory. It's often set by who their clients are, where they're selling into the different markets. So I hope that answers a bit of your question. There are phytosanitary requirements for food in both countries. A lot of things depend on the enforcement. I will tell you that enforcement in South Africa is something that is still it's not at the level that the United States can afford. You know, being an emerging country, South Africa, although it is relatively sophisticated, doesn't have the enforcement, and so people often try to get around some of the rules. But in order to export across borders, which is what most companies want to do to be successful, they do have to fit into the a lot of the general requirements that are required in the US and the EU particularly.
Okay, great. Well, that is all for questions, unless anyone wants to add anything in the Q&A before we. Mm-hmm.
Did we miss the part about the trade agreements?
Trade agreement. Yeah, there was also trade
Okay,
agreements
well,
with Africa, such as NAFTA. Sorry.
right. So the Southern Africa Customs Union covers South Africa and four other countries that are in this little grouping. So Botswana, Namibia, Eswatini, and Lesotho are all part of the South African market. And then there are two other countries that have acceded to that, although they're not officially in that group, and those are Mauritius and Mozambique. So that is one solid grouping. And then you have the East African community. We did cover the different trade blocks, and you can look at the maps of them in the presentation. And in terms of US-Africa trade agreements, South African food ingredients typically can enter the United States duty-free, but it's going to depend on exactly what you're looking at under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is an American legislated unilateral act of Congress. So there is potential to see that as an agreement, but there is no free trade agreement right now between the United States and South Africa, and there's no free trade agreement with the United States and Kenya. Although with Kenya, there are serious negotiations going on right now, and it's possible within the next 2 years that we will see that happening. With South Africa, we're still a ways away. There were some lost political opportunities about 15 years ago where we came very close to having a free trade agreement, but that doesn't exist right now. So right now, American companies come under general preferences coming into South Africa and Kenya, and hopefully with negotiations in the near-term future, we're going to see the tariff levels coming down on American goods. But just remember that with European goods, there is generally free trade agreements with most African countries, but with Chinese goods, with Indian goods, there is not. And so it's generally when you're benchmarking, you would benchmark against European goods. And, we're not, for South Africa, we're not looking at very high tariffs. It would generally be between 0 and 10%. So for Kenya, Faith, maybe you have a number there that you can pass on.
Yeah, in Kenya, it's about the same. Again, it is dependent on the ingredient. So it is about, I think it would be about 10 to 20% depending on the ingredient.
Yeah.
Okay.
South Africa actually has a lower average weighted tariff than the United States, meaning that it is less tariffed than the general imports that come into the United States. So it's not like Brazil or France or other places where you have to deal with very high tariffs generally on your American goods. It's generally a low tariff market.
Okay, we just have one quick question, but I'll answer that. It's about how to use the branded program for this mission. You can contact your liaison and they can send you a link to sign up for the program, whether you're in the Midwest or Northeast. Please, reach out to them, or, if you have Carol's email, she can put you in the direction of the right liaison. But with that, thank you for your time today. Please reach out with any questions. We're all looking forward to this mission, and thank you for joining us on the call today.